Thank you, Katie. Greetings and welcome everyone to our webinar today to introduce the new initial certification training curriculum for long-term care ombudsman programs. My name is Amity Overall-Labe and we are thrilled to introduce these new materials today, and to help us do that, you will hear from Beverly Lawbert, the National Ombudsman Program Coordinator for the Administration for Community Living, and Carol Scott, Ombudsman Specialist with NORC. Thanks, Carol. Before we get started today, I want to run through a few housekeeping items. Next slide, please. As a reminder, please use the Q&A feature for questions for the speakers. Use the chat feature to submit comments and respond to questions from speakers, because there will be, just to give you a preview, there will be an activity a few slides from now from Carol, and you'll be asked to respond. We are recording today's presentation, and the recording and all materials will be available on the website and also emailed to our entire network after the presentation. Next slide. For those of you that may not have participated in a webinar since we added this feature, you can now see a live transcript and have closed captioning. So scroll to the bottom of your screen and click live transcript, and you have options to view or hide the subtitles, and you can also change the size of those subtitles. You can also download the full transcript of today's presentation by clicking View Full Transcript. Next slide. We are also offering certificates of participation for all of NORC webinars to assist programs with meeting their continuing education requirements. So to get a certificate, you have to register yourself individually with your email address to the Zoom webinar and attend the Zoom webinar for at least 30 minutes. So the live webinar, not listening to the recording later. And the certificate will include your name, the training details, and the amount of time that you spent on the webinar. If you have any questions about these certificates, we have FAQs at the link on this slide. Next slide, please. So the initial certification training curriculum for long-term care ombudsman programs is a basic curriculum for initial certification training based on the requirements included in the Administration for Community Living, or ACL's, long-term care ombudsman program training standards. We will provide highlights about the curriculum materials and the training standards today. By the end of today's webinar, you will be able to identify the core components of the minimum training standards established by ACL, describe the materials that are part of the revised initial certification training curriculum, and know where to find the revised curriculum. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide and then turn it over to Beverly Lawbert, the National Ombudsman Program Coordinator with ACL, to provide some remarks and review the training standards. Thank you, Bev.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. This is definitely a day to be celebrated. The team at the Ombudsman Resource Center and a much broader team, too many to mention probably, have worked so hard on these on this training curriculum, and they have just done a wonderful job. They've been great to work with, and so to Amity and Carol and Katie, who's running today's webinar, thank you for all of your great work. Go ahead to the next slide, Katie. So the Ombudsman Program training standards were required by the Federal Older Americans Act, and in 2019, the Administration for Community Living released those standards, requiring a specific minimum hours of initial training. The Older Americans Act, or the training standards, actually talk about the Older Americans Act, requires that the content include federal, state, and local laws, regulations, policies, So you'll see, and Carol will walk you through, there are several areas of the curriculum where you'll want to add your specific state and local information. The curriculum has to include investigative techniques and other matters the state determines to be appropriate. So let me point out again, the training standards are a minimum. So the curriculum is a minimum. If you want to add to it, you certainly can. I know that there are states that exceed the 36 required hours, and that's perfectly fine. And then also the standards specify in-service training that you need to continue, or representatives of the Office of the State Ombudsman need to continue each year. Next slide. So the requirement is 36 hours of initial training, including up to 7 hours of independent study, at least 10 hours in the field. So getting that actual practice with someone to provide that guidance, connect it to the role of the ombudsman, and then 16 to 20 hours of classroom style training. So when they developed the curriculum at the Resource Center, they kept all of these things in mind and developed it with these hours in mind. And then once a representative is designated after completing the certification training, and some states require an exam, some states don't, but after that initial training is done, then annually having to get 18 hours of in-service training. And through today's webinar, you'll see how NORC is going to try to make that easier for you, because I know that that is a big lift for some states and local programs as well. So we're trying to make it easy. NORC has done a great job with that. They've developed some mechanisms to assist you. So I'm not going to talk any longer, because you need to get to the meat of this webinar with the great Resource Center staff. And I'll be here to answer questions as we go, and we'll be watching the chat as well. So thanks for giving me a few minutes, Amity. And again, congratulations.
Thank you so much, Deb. All right, to get to the meat of today's webinar, many of you may be familiar already with the current curriculum materials. The image on the left is from our website archive. There were PDFs and PowerPoints, as well as an online course based on the curriculum content. Those materials are all now archived, and moving forward, programs will use the training materials we share today. At this point, we do not have an online course to accompany the written materials and PowerPoints, but we plan to in the future. Next slide. For the curriculum development, following ACL's program training standards, we worked with an adult education expert who applied recommended principles of adult learning to our development process. Included in the training are large and small group discussions and activities, videos, role plays, and more. Information is presented at its most basic form at first, and then details are layered in as the training modules progress. Next slide. As Bev mentioned earlier, there are literally too many to name, but I'm going to give it a shot. The development of this curriculum was a true team effort. We are extremely appreciative of the wealth of knowledge each team member contributed to the process. The primary author and subject matter expert, Jamie Freshy of Fresh Start Consulting, is a consultant with NORC and Consumer Voice, and prior to consulting, she served as the Illinois State Ombudsman and was part of the Illinois program for 15 years. Michelle Gralnick of M. Gralnick Enterprises served as the project lead, facilitating the pilot training, coordinating project tasks, and more to usher the curriculum through the process. Carol Scott, who you all know, Ombudsman Specialist with NORC, was a key part of the curriculum development team, lending her experience as a subject matter expert and trainer that she acquired during her 23 years as the Missouri State Ombudsman. The curriculum would not have been possible without several Ombudsman programs pilot testing and evaluating the training materials. Over 140 individuals, Ombudsmen and representatives, both paid and volunteer, participated in pilot training to test materials and provide input. The curriculum also benefited from utilizing training videos and/or materials from several Ombudsman programs. Last but not least, a very special thank you to Louise Ryan, Regional Administrator for Region 10 and former National Ombudsman Program Coordinator with ACL, and Beverly Laubert, new National Ombudsman Program Coordinator, for sharing their years of knowledge, time, and thoughtful feedback through the creation of the curriculum from start to finish. So I know I can't name everyone personally, but we do include the names of the Ombudsman Program participants, as well as other subject matter experts in our acknowledgements document. Next slide. So moving on to what's actually included in the training materials, thanks to this wonderful team of experts. We have a trainer guide, we have a trainee manual, PowerPoint, an introduction and overview document, a preparation checklist and training tips, a comprehensive list of keywords or a glossary, a list of state-specific information, and the acknowledgements. Next slide. We have several introduction and planning documents that I really encourage you to review first before you dig into the curriculum content. The introduction and overview resource explains the purpose of the curriculum, suggestions for how to use the curriculum, and it reviews all of the available materials. The preparation checklist and training tips provide tips for basic adult learning techniques, how to prepare for training, setting up in-person portions of training, how to train virtually, and managing the training environment. The curriculum is not a standalone complete package, as you heard from Bev. It does not contain everything an individual needs to be designated. So to assist trainers, we have identified the required state-specific information that needs to be added or addressed in some capacity within the introduction of each module in the trainer guide, and as well in a comprehensive list. And again, there's the glossary of keywords, links to training videos, and an acknowledgement document. Next slide. The curriculum consists of 10 modules. There is a trainer guide, which is the blue set of materials, a trainee manual, which is the green one, and a PowerPoint deck for each module. Just so you know, the PowerPoints are designed to highlight parts of the curriculum and to be used to accompany the content, but not supplant the trainer guide and trainee manual. The curriculum materials are available as PDF documents, as well as Word and PowerPoint formats that you can customize to meet your needs. Add your logos, add your state-specific information, and so forth. The materials are most effective when used for in-person training. However, we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and we understand that. So the materials can be adapted to your needs to use remotely, as they were used successfully for distance learning via webinar during pilot testing. The curriculum is intended to be presented in its entirety, with the 10 modules building upon another. That said, trainers may present the order of modules according to their state training process, as states do conduct training differently due to a variety of factors. Additionally, states may determine what part of the curriculum or parts they would like trainees to complete as independent study, such as pre-work before classroom training or homework in between training, and so on. So it's very customizable. The curriculum provides approximately 30 hours of training time, give or take, more or less, depending how you train personally and how many trainees you have in the room, how much to use for discussion time, and how much you add in for state-specific information. So it all really varies, and this is really an estimate based on us pulling this together and pilot testing the materials. Next slide. Before reading the trainer guide, we encourage you to read the introduction and planning documents, as I mentioned, and follow the steps in those documents. Even for the most experienced trainer, it is crucial to spend time reviewing the materials. As much as possible, follow the outline that we've provided in the trainer guide. Included within the trainer guide are case and situational examples. Feel free to use your own personal examples that demonstrate the teaching point for that part in the curriculum instead of the examples provided. Each module in the trainer guide has several sections with suggested timeframes, table of contents, the state-specific information listed at the beginning of each module, the keywords and terms that will be introduced or reviewed in that module, the trainer's notes, which, as you can see in the screenshot on the bottom right, they appear in blue italics throughout the text, and they assist the trainer in providing additional information and context and directions. We have learning objectives for each module, footnotes for citations, as well as links to additional information, and end of module questions, so you can see how much the trainees have learned during that training session. Next slide. The Trainee Manual, the green booklet, includes everything that the trainer guide does except for the state-specific notes and trainer's notes. So it has a table of contents, the key words, learning objectives identified, footnotes, module questions, but of course without the answers that are in the trainer guide, and then links to additional resources. Next slide. As you saw a couple slides ago, the trainer guide has trainer's notes to assist you in training and in the training and planning process. They appear in blue italics like this one on the slide. They provide time frames, guide you through the module, explain the training points, and tell you how to conduct the activities. So now I'm going to turn it over to Carol to talk about adult learning principles and share an activity example.
Thank you, Amity. I'm going to put on my hard hat because, or actually it's my bicycle helmet, because we're going to get into some of the meat of what's in here. And I want you not only to be celebrating about all this, but I want to just bring a little bit of smiles, because I'll tell you, this is a lot of material. We worked very hard, as Amity said, to make this materials be applicable to adult learning. And I want to ask you in the chat if you'll put in how you learn best. Do you learn best by reading? Do you learn best by watching other people do something? Do you learn best by actually doing it yourself? You know, do watch webinars or listen to people speak? And I'll tell you that just based on the very few that have put stuff in here, you'll see that there's even those of us that are doing the training or are doing this work learn by different methods. So in the adult learning theory, it really does talk about, you know, how do we make sure that the people that we're training, you know, want this information. If there's a way to relinquish the authority during the training and become a facilitator, that's wonderful, to allow people to have time to share. And I think there's some valuable information that you can get by watching the session that's listed in the box here on the slide. This was a session done at the Consumer Voice Conference this past fall with Karen Fortuna. She is an expert in adult learning theory and provided a lot of good information. So I encourage you to listen to this, because as you can see, oh, everybody's, I guess, well, thank you all for writing to me. If when you're typing in the chat, be sure that you click everyone instead of just hosts and panelists. So let me just read, there's a bunch in here. lecture style with note-taking, hands-on experience. By doing it, interactive, brief overviews, watch, then do myself, reading, hands-on, visual learner, or by doing. So how you learn best is typically how we end up training. So this is just a reminder that people learn different ways. And so if there is one thing we would hope that as you're looking through the materials and looking at the slides, that you'll think about making sure that you're not spending the whole time lecturing, that we've built in activities, we've built in videos to watch. And so those are very important keys. And this really does go back to something that Amity said earlier. The curriculum is layered and is done that way on purpose so that we're not just bringing up an issue and talking all about it. You know, here's everything you need to know about resident councils, or here's everything you need to know about the survey process. We've brought it and put it into different modules so that people are not overwhelmed with, I'm going to take that off because that's overwhelming me. So next slide, please. These are just a list of things to be aware of when you're training for online. I think the first thing on this is to make sure that all of your trainees are comfortable with using Zoom or whatever platform that you use. Be sure to take the time before you start training to make sure that people understand all of that. I will point out here this one that says I, we, you method. And it's something, again, that we tried to build into the training, is that I will do something as the trainer, we'll do something as a group, and then there's an opportunity for you to do it yourself. And that seems to be a very good way to for you to model how things, what they're learning, and then for you to watch and be able to provide constructive criticism, either as a group or one-on-one, depending on what you're seeing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give an example of an activity that's in the curriculum, and I'll model how to conduct this. And so please respond as though you are a trainee, and place your answers in the chat, and be sure that you're clicking respond to everyone so that you can see each other's comments. So
Carol, they can't respond to everyone, just to let you know. It's a setting issue on our end. So just, I put it in the chat that they can just go ahead and respond, and we will share some of the chat.
Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry, didn't realize that. Okay, so compared to other services and programs in the Aging and Disability Network, the Ombudsman program is unique in many ways. There is often misunderstanding, confusion, and even tension when representatives interact with others who do not understand the program. Therefore, it is important to have clear understanding about the role and the unique characteristics of the program due to the federal requirements. So in the trainer's notes, it says, do not, Katie, don't do anything. I'm going to say this out loud, but don't do anything. So you're going to click to have the first line appear where it's going to say, let's start with the term best interest. You're going to click again to have it. The second line comes up that says, it sounds nice, but what is it? And so now in the chat, would you type in, who can tell me what is in my best interest? Who can tell me what's in my best interest? Yep. Yep. So me, no one but me, the resident, Yep. And so that is something very important when we're talking about best interest. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. So there's a variety of examples and definitions of best interest. Best interest is a subjective term, which means different things to different people. It's a personal decision based on your thoughts, experiences, morals, values, etc. It's a personal decision whether you are thinking of your own best interest or someone else's best interest. When someone is working with another's best interest in mind, there is a judgment attached to what the helper deems is the best interest of the individual. It may or may not be what the individual wants or believes to be in his or her best interest, or a qualifier as living the highest quality of life possible. Okay, Katie, next slide. So the program does not make decisions for the resident. Rather, the program supports and advocates on behalf of the resident's wishes. So what professions work in the best interest of individuals? Type that in. What professions work in the best interest of individuals? Nurses, doctors, social workers, clergy, APS, okay? People who work in the medical profession or in a social service profession, as examples, have been taught to work in the best interest of the client. What are some statements that someone who looks through a best interest lens might say? What are some statements that someone who looks through a best interest lens might say? Yeah, you need to, it's too risky, you should, I'm here to help you. It's in your best interest to do this. Oh, you don't want to do that. Oh, excellent. So many medical professionals' point of view of the patient is through a medical best interest lens. Example, people with diabetes should follow a low sodium or low sugar diet. Click on the first, yeah. And then social service professionals' point of view of their client is often through a safety best interest lens. Example, it's not safe for you to live at home without services. So click, and there it is. It's not safe to live at home without services. Here's another example of a best interest statement. And the third bubble, click, you shouldn't smoke. The missing piece here is self-determination. Self-determination is being in control of your own life. This approach may conflict with the perspective of the facility, their staff, the medical professionals, family members, and others, as they might feel that resident-directed advocacy and self-determination is not in the best interest of the resident on specific issues. So, next slide. To demonstrate the differences between those professions who are required to work in the best interest of individuals, here are some responses from the Ombudsman program based on the examples from the previous slide. Katie, click on the next one. So these are the three examples. Betty is a resident who has diabetes and tells you that she does not want her food portions limited and wants to eat whatever she wants. Betty understands the consequences of not following a low sugar diet. So click on the next. The representative would tell Betty she has a right to decide what she wants to eat. Stanley wants to go home after his therapy is complete. The facility is concerned because his home was found to be unsafe when he came to the facility. Stanley insists on going home without services and refuses to stay in the facility. So we would click on to show the next bubble and say, while it is true Stanley has a right to go home, it is also the responsibility of the facility to educate him on the consequences of going home without services. The Ombudsman can also explain the consequences and possible outcomes of Stanley's decision with him. Regardless, he still has a right to go home. Next one, David complains that the staff are trying to get him to stop smoking because of a new diagnosis and wants your help. David stated he didn't care about his health condition and has smoked since he was 12 and has no intentions of quitting now. So click on the next bubble. Let's try to talk to staff and try to see what they can do to make it possible for David to continue smoking. So this is just, as you can see in this exercise, we are first talking about what is best interest. We're talking about then self-determination, and we're talking about the unique role that the Ombudsman program and the Ombudsman has, where we're not going to follow best interest. We're going to follow the wishes and wants of the resident, ensuring that they're educated and that they know the options, and recognizing that sometimes people want things that are not in their best interest. How many of you know that you need to lose weight and have not lost weight? How many of you smoke and know you shouldn't smoke? How many of you don't take your medications as it's prescribed? On and on and on. And and that's why we're there. Next slide. So just some other comments about the curriculum. The expectations are explained at the beginning of each of the modules. The answers to a lot of the questions that you're going to be asking, we've included those. As Amity mentioned, if you've got a personal example of something that you have worked on, a case that you can change the details of, and use it, please feel free to use it. There are a lot of concrete examples of Ombudsman advocacy, which is why it is going to be so important that you read through the trainer's guide multiple times, that you don't rely just on the PowerPoint, because the PowerPoint is just pulling out certain aspects, and you're going to want to take the time to figure out which sections do you want people to read ahead of time or to read during class, so that you can then have conversations. Next slide, please. And this last slide of mine is just a reminder again that before you begin using this curriculum, you need to talk with your state ombudsman to ensure that you have the appropriate state specific information included. You know, the entire purpose behind ACL coming out with the training standards was to ensure that there is consistency, not only across states, but across the country, recognizing that there will be some things that are very state specific. That's fine, that's great. You'll want to be thinking, how do you bring in your policy manual and procedure manual into the training? But there are many places within the modules where it will reference, you know, if you have a policy on this, this now would be a good time to remind people of it, or to, I'm sorry, I got sidetracked by this. I've been on a diet since I was 16. Okay. Okay, and I tell you that my last comment is have fun. Have fun with this training. We look forward to seeing what, hearing back from you, and we hope that you will share with us, and I'm probably stealing from Amity, but we hope you will share with us any activities that you do as part of this training that's not in there, and maybe in a future revision, we'll add those. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amity.
Okay, I can't believe during the webinar when we're introducing this new resource, she's already talking about revisions in the future. No, Carol, not funny. Thank you so much, Carol and Bev. And Carol did bring up a point that I wanted to reiterate. And I think today's webinar was a perfect example about how much we learn from you all. So as I mentioned earlier in the acknowledgements, we borrowed from a lot of programs and individuals that had videos or scenarios, case studies, et cetera, that we borrowed from and incorporated in the curriculum. But as Carol mentioned, we continue to learn from you, and we really encourage you to share anything you create. Even just during this webinar, when I commented that we were having a problem with being able to chat everyone, one of you stepped forward. Thank you, Annie Kim, for telling me exactly which dots to hit to make sure that you could all communicate. So we continue to learn from all that you do and really appreciate it. As Bev mentioned, the Resource Center, when part of us trying to assist you in meeting those continuing education hours, is our offering of the certificates of participation in all of our webinars. And in the future, we also plan on producing other short vignettes that are videos that you could use with your programs and so on. And so please share your examples, and we will share them on the website and likely borrow from them in the future when we create things. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. I believe that's time for questions. So I see a lot of comments coming in. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please share them with us. One question was, will already certified ombudsmen need to recertify with this new content? Good question. Thank you for asking. And no, if they already are certified, they went through your certification and designation process, because there's the certification training, and then, as you know, they have to be designated by the state ombudsman, then no. However, they do need to maintain at a minimum 18 hours of continuing education. And as you may have read in the training standards by ACL, that is a minimum, so a floor of continuing education for all representatives, volunteers, and paid staff. And ACL encourages that paid representatives actually have more continuing education than 18 hours a year. Another question we received is about continuing education or in-service hours, and what calendar is used to determine the 18 hours. Is it 12 months from certification that those 18 hours must be completed? Is it a calendar year? Is it a fiscal year? So Bev, while Carol was talking, I skimmed the training standards, and I did not see, I just saw annual. So just to verify, is ACL requiring that it be the federal fiscal year or calendar year or even a state fiscal year?
I would say that the state should determine what the year is, if it's from certification for 12 months after that, or if they want to manage it by a calendar year, then we leave that up to the state.
Excellent. Thank you for that response and flexibility, because I used to have to keep track of that, and I know that's really hard because everyone is designated at different times. So thank you for that, Bev. Very helpful. So do the 10 modules count towards classroom time for the trainee, or are some to be independent training? Another good question. So all encompassing, we guessed and estimated that the entire 10 modules, whether it's classroom time, independent, if you're doing it on your own, as written, would be about 30 hours of training. And that's without even your state-specific information, because obviously we couldn't put that in for you. And so we offer the flexibility for you to provide some of it in classroom or some of it in independent learning. So as I mentioned earlier, you could assign maybe that they watch a video at home or as pre-work and then come to class ready to talk about it. So you would count those hours, whether it's classroom or independent, based on how you assign them, if that makes sense. I hope that's clear. And Carol and Bev, feel free to jump in if you have more to add to that. To confirm, if we have more than 36 hours of initial training, we are to increase the amount of self-learning. So I'm not really sure I follow that question, but to try to take a stab at it, it was a minimum of 36 hours of initial training. That includes everything. So that would include self-learning, that would include shadowing, that would include classroom training, all 36 hours. The training standards break it down into how they want those 36 hours spent in order to make sure, for example, that you're not doing all 36 in the classroom or all 36 in the field. It needs to be a little bit of a variety. So up to 7 hours or no more than 20% for states that provide for more than 36 hours of training. So if you provide more than 36 hours already, no more than 20% of that number should be independent study or homework. At least 10 hours of the training needs to be in the field, and a range of 16 to 20 hours conducted in a classroom style setting. So I hope that clarifies if your state has more than 36 hours of training. Good question.
Let me just add, the question just came in on the chat. If previously designated ombudsman staff had to complete less than 36 hours to get designated, do they need to receive additional training to come up to 36? And I'm going to respond and say no. If you've got someone who's already designated, as Amity mentioned earlier, they are designated, and you just need to continue with the 18 hours of continuing education. But if you read Mary Swineford's information, she said that when paid staff who've been in the program for years participated in the pilot projects, they walked away with several things that they were surprised about, I guess I could say. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And I think that's across the board. We at NORC, we provide orientation training for new state ombudsmen, and we often have state ombudsmen stay in that orientation process for more than 2 years or act as a mentor to new state ombudsmen. And even those mentors that have been in the program for a decade or more say they learned something new in those orientation sessions. So I think we're always learning. I know I am. Bev, I see your camera. Did you want to add something?
Only that when I was reviewing the curriculum, I learned a few things, and I've been an ombudsman for 33 years. So
exactly. Thank you. So another question, do you have recommendations on how to train volunteers with this longer training curriculum? We struggle to get volunteers through 2 days of the certification training we used previously. So great question. And we know with any changes, there's always going to be some resistance, especially if you're adding more content or more requirements in general. We've received a few calls and emails from state programs that are looking at restructuring their training process. So I think this could be a future conversation about how programs structure their volunteer training. So for example, some states, at least in my previous experience, training for volunteers would be like an internship for about 3 months time. And so they would come in person, if I remember correctly, twice. We broke it down into 2 different visits. So the first part was kind of the introduction, orientation stuff, the history and role of the program. We didn't get into complaint resolution until the part 2. So we did part 1 training with all the orientation, history and role, visit information, and then we would go out in the facility for several weeks with that individual. Either they were assigned with a experienced volunteer or staff would visit with them occasionally, and then we would come back and do the part 2, which was more in depth about complaint resolution. And that was really helpful to break the training up over an extended period of time, especially with volunteers. Whether you're a volunteer or a paid person, this is a lot of content back to back for 2 or 3 consecutive days of training. So I would encourage everyone to take a fresh look at their training and see if you can space it out, what would be better for the trainers, trainees. Talk to some of your recent trainees that you recently certified and get a feel for their experience. So those are my initial suggestions. I know that there's a lot more, and Carol, correct me if I'm mistaken, but wasn't the last TA talk about volunteer management? Did you cover, did the presenters cover any training tips that may be helpful to this question?
We did. So it might be helpful if people went back and listened to that. And I'll say, Elaine just put in here a very good comment that the new volunteers don't know that this is an increased amount of training. So it's not like they're like, oh my God, you know, it used to be this, and they don't know that because they're coming in now. And there's been several people who've been asking, when does this training need to start? And the answer would be as soon as you can add your state specific stuff and get in. And then are states required to use this training? The answer is no. We encourage it, but if states have developed their own and it contains everything that's part of the training standards, they're good to go. And then one question, well, that's enough for me. You can read the rest of them. Thanks.
No, go for it, Carol. You're on a roll.
Okay, well, so the question came up, this is an older program, so why are certification standards only now being addressed? Bev?
Well, it takes time to develop those standards. There was actually a very broad consensus process. The Older Americans Act required the Administration for Community Living to develop training standards. And ACL embarked on a pretty extensive stakeholder process. They put together a group with the Ombudsman Resource Center and the Ombudsman Program Associations to come up with recommendations for the standards for ACL then to draft and put out. And they came out in 2019, and then work on the curriculum ensued right away.
And Louise, welcome, Louise, mentioned that, you know, we had to have the rule, the Ombudsman rule first before we could do that. And that just took a long time.
Correct. And everything usually took a little longer than originally planned. And this process, as Bev mentioned, and Carol a bit, goes back years. So we facilitated a work group that involved stakeholders, not just from Ombudsman programs, but just experts in Ombudsman program research, providers perspective, et cetera. So this has been a work in process for many, many years. And yes, these manuals will be available to print. They're actually available to print and download right now. How they're arranged, and I'll show you in a couple slides on the website. We have them as PDFs in their entirety, so they'll be easy for you to download all 10 modules as one document for the trainee version and the trainer, and then we have them broken into individual modules as Word documents and PowerPoint. So that way you can take them off and move things around and personalize them. But I cannot reiterate enough as far as taking these down, downloading them, and using them. Please, please, please talk to your state ombudsman and state office. As Carol mentioned and Bev mentioned, but I just have to say it again, the entire purpose of us being involved in this process and developing a curriculum that has been approved by ACL is to improve the consistency of training that representatives receive both across the country and within states, because you are part of a state program. And so please communicate with your state office about how and if they're going to be using this curriculum before you download it and print it and use it yourself, okay? But I'm excited that you're excited to download it. So, all right, let's see.
Well, and it's also going to be necessary to print out copies. I mean, people need to have the printed copy if they're going to be given assignments in order for them to, those of you that said you do best by reading and highlighting and making notes, you're going to want to make sure that people have the hard copy in their hand after you've included the state-specific information. And did you see the question about the one-on-one meetings with trainers?
I was about to address that one. Yes. The question was, can a classroom instruction include one-on-one meetings with trainers? Absolutely. I used to work in a very rural area and often had meetings one-on-one with volunteers for training. And that was what we meant by some days your training may take several more hours. If you have 10 people in one classroom setting opposed to one person, you can usually banter back and forth and move through the curriculum and the content maybe a little faster. But yes, that still counts because that you're still providing training to that trainee. Good question. For individuals that are in the middle of their training, do they need to now switch to these standards? I'm going to answer, and then Bev, I want you to back me up if you think otherwise. But similar to those that have already been certified and designated, I would say no. You've already started on one process. I would continue with your current process to train and certify and designate that individual, and then eventually shift to this new one if you're going to incorporate the curriculum. Bev, would you agree with that?
Yeah, but you know, the word of the, I think probably is going to become the decade for COVID is hybrid. So I would recommend looking through this curriculum since you are in the middle and you haven't finished someone's certification. Look through this curriculum and pull from it what might be useful to you. But as far as required to switch now to doing 36, I'm not going to worry about that. So that would be up to the state ombudsman to decide how they want to manage that in their state.
Thank you. And another question that it was mentioned that paid staff will be required to have more hours of in-service training. I did not say required. I said it was encouraged by ACL. So please don't walk away thinking that you're required to have more than 18 hours of continuing education as a paid representative. It is encouraged by ACL that paid representatives have more than 18, which frankly, when you're doing on-the-job work and you're consulting with your supervisor about cases, or you're attending statewide webinars or attending our webinars, paid representatives should have no issue in getting more than 18 hours. Let's see, there was one more that, about can the trainee and trainer manual be available as a Word document? Yeah, so we already have them as entire PDF documents, but I'll see if Katie can merge them all together and upload them as Word documents too. But the trainee and trainer manuals and guides are available already as Word documents, just individual modules. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. I encourage you, if you have more questions after this webinar, you'll see our contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out. And this is not going to be the first time that we talk about this. This was just the, yay, let's get this out the door and show everyone what it is. And we'll talk more about how to incorporate it and even share examples of how you are doing so with your peers would be great. So just to let you know, this is where you can find this information. So at the very top of this page is a fantastic video intro that Katie put together for us. It's less than 2 minutes long. I think this would be a fun way for you to share with your representatives about this new curriculum. It provides a very brief overview of everything that's in there. And maybe you could even use it whenever you talk to volunteers about their future training process to get them excited and let them know they're part of this national network. And the information they're going to learn is so important that everyone has this basic foundation and structure. So please use that as you see fit, and everything is on that website or web page that you need. Next slide, please. So we had, I think, more than 500 people register for this webinar, and I always want to put a plug in. I don't know how you received information about this webinar. If you do not receive our direct emails, please join our database to receive them. So you'll get the webinar notifications, you'll get our quarterly e-newsletter, and a lot more information than that. So please, to receive our emails directly, use that link to sign up, and then encourage your volunteer representatives and your peers that you work with to sign up as well if they haven't already. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so like I said, here's our contact information, our website, our general email address. We have a Facebook and Twitter account, and we even have an app. If you haven't downloaded our app yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. So with that, I want to say thanks again to everyone that contributed to the development of this curriculum. As you can see, it was quite a lift, and I know that you out in your individual local programs and state programs, providing any training is a lift, and we want to make it easier for you. So I encourage you, even if your state decides not to incorporate the curriculum and what you already have, like Bev said, look at a hybrid approach, and maybe there's some cases or some activities you could at least borrow from the curriculum and use in your training process. So thank you all for attending. Thank you for your nice comments. Thank you, Bev. Thank you, Carol, for presenting. Thank you, Katie, for doing all the background things. We really appreciate it. Please reach out to us. Don't be shy. We're here to answer your questions. So anything about curriculum content and the training process. And I know that you have a lot going on with volunteer management as well, and we're always here to help you with that as well. So that is all I have today. Any last comments, Bev or Carol?
Nope. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. We look forward to working with you as this rolls out. So thanks, everyone. It's a great team, and we're happy to work with you. Take care. Bye.